Hey, listeners and viewers, you'll notice that this episode starts abruptly, and that's because as I was setting up the audio and video for the episode, a conversation naturally opened up about some of the latest interactions with our father-in-law. We didn't want to cut it out because there's a lot of honesty shared here and wish we would have started recording sooner. But anyway, here's the latest episode focusing on the fathers in our lives. Thanks for watching and listening. And if this message resonates with you, please give this a like and a share. Thanks again.
That's probably why, because there's like an ego thing behind that, right?
Yeah.
That actually helped me understand things a little bit better, so it kind of works a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to him the other day, and he was like, I don't like asking you guys to do stuff if it's not going to be done right away, so I'll just do it myself. And I'm like, that's not how things work, though. If you ask someone to do a favor, then like you have to wait for them to do it on their time. He's like, yeah, I know, but I get like he calls it an itch in his butt. It's the best way to describe it. So I get like an itch, and I got to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but if you need help and you can't do it, you got to depend on the other people, and they kind of got to do it when they can do it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So,
No, I think, yeah, it's a challenge sometimes to get. That's the case, I guess, with working with anybody, that, you know, you have to kind of assess what your expectations are, or timing, or anything like that. But I think specifically, since we are kids to him, and especially like married to wives, you know, there's a weird dynamic. There's a weird dynamic about, like, you know, whether or not we're qualified to do anything. Not in a negative way, but you know, we just don't. And I mean, but I kind of feed into that, frankly, on purpose, because I think that as a father, seeing your daughter get married and really rely on you less, it's probably very difficult, right?
Yeah, there's like,
and so I kind of don't mind not even bothering to learn certain things, because like I used to get at me from an ego standpoint, but I think it's actually as a man to man type thing. It's like, look, maybe if I don't learn this, and she always calls you for that thing, that's nice for you, right?
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's a moment that he gets to
have. Because if I
learn angry when my wife would call her father-in-law when our car would break down, I'd be like, you call me. She's like, what do I do? And I'm like, that's a good point. I'd probably call your dad. I'd probably call your dad, and then we can see where that goes.
But yeah, it's like, but I do think there's, and I mean, still there's issues sometimes where my wife will be like, oh, I'm gonna just call my dad and figure this out. But I think that actually it's better to, it's not like done out of, it's not like you're doing it out of pity, or you're doing it out of that you can't do it, or whatever, or don't want to, or you're lazy or whatever. Sure. I think honestly it's just kind of like it's doing it, it's acknowledging that he has a role to serve, for, like we all do, and by not letting him do it, it's kind of, you're taking something away from his ability, right? Yeah. And I think that we all need, like we had talked from in an earlier episode, and we're just kind of jumping into it, which is kind of good. I hit record.
It's kind of funny. I saw the record, and I was like, oh, let's go with it.
It's kind of in. I know.
It feels more organic that way.
I know it's just switch to saying your wife, which I thought was like, wow, he knows. But I think that I think that men, and we talked about this in an episode before, that men we need to feel needed and capable.
Yeah, there's that for sure.
And that's a big, it's a big factor for us, more so than loved and supported. Needed and capable is a big deal. And so I think that in that exact way, it's the best way we can show each other how we support each other is to give us opportunities to be needed and to be supported, you know, to like, bring me in, help, like, let's build something, let's go do this thing.
Well, that's why I mentioned the audio equipment thing, because it's like then he feels like there's equal exchange there, right? And then you're coming on like this even ground, which like maybe to him doesn't seem like that big a deal. Like, oh yeah, you just plug the things because he knows the stuff, right? The same way you know marketing, right? I think if you tell him, I think that's like a good way to go about it. Yeah, maybe that's what we do in the future. Maybe we can bring him in to do.
And for anybody watching and listening to this, we are desperately trying to figure out our audio situation. I am, at least. I think last time, and we actually did narrow it down to the mic, I think, because Francisco's wearing a mic, a lapel mic, and I was wearing one last time. And Francisco sounded like smooth jazz, and I sounded like death metal. And it was just this real obnoxious thing. So you see that I'm using this mic, but I think we're still trying to figure it out. We've been up here for an hour toggling things, and then it doesn't pick up certain things. So someday we'll figure this out. Our next decision, the reason we're bringing this up and how I just started hitting record, and it's going to be a weird, choppy part of this intro, is that we want to talk about dads on this episode and fathers. And our father-in-law, again, we're married to our wives, our sisters. And so we have the same father-in-law, if you want to trace that in how that works in a family tree. That's how it works. But he's a musician and very, very capable. He's not only the musician, but he's the leader of his band, and handles all the audio side of it. The setup. Yeah, he had at one point a full-on recording studio in his garage, and was operable. Does all, yeah. So I mean,
he set up the mics outside. He did all of that. He's the ceremony.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's
awesome. Great. He's extremely capable at this stuff. And so we're putzing around, and Francisco wisely is like, we should just bring him in, help us figure this out, make us sound better. And so that's probably something we'll work on. So the next one, if it doesn't sound better, then I take back everything I just said about him. Absolutely doesn't know what he's doing. And that's unfortunate. But yeah, we want to talk about fathers this episode. Reason being is that obviously this show is focusing on men and they kind of some of the heavy burdens that we carry with being men, and I think different times of our life and what that's like, and fatherhood being one of them. Now I'm a father, and Francisco is not a father to any children we know about.
That I know about.
Not
for sure.
Of course not. Yeah, I know. Cut that.
She don't listen. I know, she hates podcasts.
She's not a subscriber. But no, so Francisco's not a father yet. And we'll talk to him we'll dive into that and get his timeline on everything. But I think that's a cool difference. One similarity we have, both of us were raised really with estranged fathers to varying degrees. So we'll kind of talk about those differences. And then I think we both acknowledge the importance of having a father in our lives, or a father in our lives, a father figure in our lives, that kind of stuff. So, and then I found that there's a really famous poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If," and that one is a famous one about fatherhood. He wrote it for his son. So I'll read that, and then what I'm going to do probably is replace it with Michael Caine reading it, because he read it at some point.
Yeah,
and who doesn't want to listen to Michael Caine? Just from memory, remembering an entire great poem. Which is something I don't think I've ever done. I don't think I've ever memorized a poem, but my son has to do it like every month, and it's usually in French. And so that's bizarre that he's just like can rattle off a poem from like some French poet, and I'm just like, I don't think I've ever done that. I remember I had to do the Gettysburg Address when I was in like sixth grade, I feel like. And I don't even think I nailed it. I think I was like stumbling around. So it's just not my thing. Memorizing something is not my thing.
I'm very much a gist of, or the energy of something, but like an exact script has never been good for me. I'm always like, I'm gonna kind of improv on some of this. All right, we're gonna see where this goes.
So you would come in with the top hat and the cane and the full suit, but you'd be like, I don't know what this poem is.
This Gettysburg, it needs to be addressed.
There's a lot of bad things. Good things? Bad things.
What
bad things.
Yeah. You're like measuring those odds.
No, this is after the bloodiest battle in the Civil War. Bad things then. Bad things. Bad things, hopeful things. They're good things. I have a dream. Nope, wrong one.
Editor's note here. After the recording, I tracked down the video of Michael Caine reciting this poem, and he was, in fact, reading it and not reciting it from memory. I now feel fully justified. Anyway, here's "If" by Kipling.
If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor look too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life for broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at the beginning, and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are done, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 40 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Let's talk about the let's talk about our fatherhood situations growing up. So, Francisco, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, sure. So for me, I have an interesting situation where my parents both had me very, very young, right? Like you and I've talked about this before. My mother was 14 when she got pregnant. My father was 16, so 17, 15 when they had me. So very interesting situation where both of my parents weren't ever like actually together while I was a child. So I've always had like this split custody situation where I stay with my mom, full time technically, most of the time. And then I'd go see my dad on the weekends, right? So we had that. And in all honesty, my dad was very involved for like that first 14 years of my life, I'd say, right? Like, so I very much had a father figure, someone I could talk to. He was a little bit more severe as I got older, but that's because he started going to church. So, like, right around the time I'm like 10-ish, is he gets very involved heavily in the church. And so that starts a little bit of the strain, I think, on our relationship because I'm not a church kid. Didn't really like it. I actually think that's probably where my like whole aversion to church kind of starts from, right? But anyways, eventually, when I turned about 14, he actually had the opportunity to be like a missionary, essentially. He went to Houston, Texas, and started his own church there, and was there up until I was about 18. So pretty much all of my high school years, which is interesting because that's actually right around the time I met my wife, right around the time I met you, right? So there's like a big development area where I think we lost that connection. And for me, it was interesting because I didn't even really want to admit that like that bothered me, right? Because you're 14, right? For me, I was like, oh man, I don't. This sounds bad. I don't mean it like this, but it's how I felt. It was I don't need him. I don't need that. He wants to leave. He wants to go do something. I'm gonna let him go do his own thing. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to kind of deal with that a little bit better and process.
Now,
that.
when you say that, just out of curiosity,
Sure.
was that out of like defiance about it, or like you don't need him? Like I don't need that guy in my life, or was it you just kind of like doing the whole like I'm all right thing, where it's like it's not a big thing, it's fine,
yeah.
You can go. It's
my
not
dad and I didn't have a strained relationship when he left. Like he'd call me every once in a while, right? Like I mean, not every once in a while, but when he got a chance, right? And it wouldn't be like I was outwardly. I don't think he even knew I was angry with him, right? But for me, it was that whole I'm all right. I'm fine. Yeah, this doesn't bother me. This isn't that big a deal. I don't need a father figure during that time. And I think I very much did. I think it. I think it like really affected me and really turned out like or really changed the dynamics because I think right at that like puberty age, right, is like when it's most pivotal to have a male role model, right? That's like when you need someone to like. Well, I'm trying to become a man and I'm seeing what masculinity is. And at this time, it's coming from my peers, which is not a great source, right? Like high school boys, come on, you know what I mean? So I think I didn't realize how much I really needed him during that time, and I don't think he realized, because we talked about it later on. Now we have a working relationship where we've kind of like we've come together. I've been having lunch, or not lunch, dinner at his place, like, once a week. We've been trying to do a lot better, right? But there was like a whole year or two where I just didn't talk to him at all and stayed away. I had to go through like therapy and figure all that out. And actually talk to him about the situation, how this affected me. And
was there some sort of blowing up, or was it just
it was
a fizzle?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's weird. You don't know that there are triggers that happen to you until like they start happening, right? But for me, church is like a big thing, right? Like in his life, it's very involved. But for me, I was like forced to be there. So it always had this really negative connotation for me, almost like a real trapping kind of feeling, right? And part of the reason why I didn't like it is because I feel like sometimes, and again, this isn't to knock any people, but I think sometimes with religion comes this moral superiority, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I think for him specifically, he's not that kind of guy normally, but there are certain situations where he's like, oh yeah, we were talking about like a cousin or something. We were at like some dinner, and he was like, oh, can you believe she moved in with this guy, and da 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 da. And at this point, something about that conversation really irked me.
Yeah.
Because one, she's not in the room to defend herself. Two, it's her life. Let her do what she wants. Like, I don't care about that. And so I think at that point there was like I didn't realize it until like maybe a week or two later, but that really, really was like a breaking point for me. And I was like, I don't want to be involved in any of that. I don't want to do that. And because I never brought it up with him, I think it was easy for me to create like this othering of him.
Sure.
And we just didn't talk for like a year. Not on his part. He tried. He reached out. I just wasn't really willing to communicate.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And do you think that, not, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, I guess, the subject, but I mean, you and your wife lived together before you were married. Do you think he was side commenting? Like, do you think there was some implication to you that sort of comment about your cousin was like not necessarily intentionally backhanding you, but it was?
I think there was a level to that, and I think what's worse, and this is weird because when you mention it, it kind of connects a little bit of dots there.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it was that he truly wasn't trying to backhand us, right? Like, I don't think he was intentionally being like, I think he didn't think about the fact that was also our situation, right? And so I think that idea really kind of hit me where it's like, oh, this is truly what you think, but you put on like a nice front for us, right? Like you're like, oh, we accept you and we don't do this for you. But really in the back of your mind, your real thoughts are, no, that's bad and you're bad, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's that curatedness or that fakeness that really made me kind of like, oh, this isn't genuine. You're putting on a front when I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm putting on a front. And I think addressing it later on really made a huge difference.
Yeah.
Now I can be a lot more just honest about things with him, and he can be honest about me. So I think it's helped. But yeah, that definitely played a part.
Yeah. No, I get that.
But so yeah, sorry, I went into a whole spiel there.
That's good.
That's what we're going for. Yeah, that was the idea there. What I know a little bit about your father backstory, right? Story with your dad, but you can feel free to take it away. What was your situation?
Yeah. So mine was kind of weird. I've thought a lot about it. It's very cut and dry, I think, for me. It was so my mom and dad were married for 20 some odd years before they had kids, and they had no intention of having kids. And then my sister came along, a surprise. And so, the life they had before was, he was like a theater manager. And my mom was, kind of did a lot of odd jobs. And so they weren't really tethered to anything. And if you ever met my mom, she's very free spirited, usually very hates the idea of being tied down to stuff. Like she's very much like, we talk my wife and I talk about all the time. We'll talk on our way home, be like, my wife will be like, can you believe your mom's saying that thing? Can you believe that she wants to go do this? And I'm like, just give it time. She's going to change her mind.
Yeah. I'm the same way.
She's going to change her mind. Don't
listen, because like dream isn't the reality.
Well, like
logistics.
Yeah. Well, she'll be like, I'm ready to move and I want to get out of here. She's talking about moving from her house 100 times. And so over and over with various different rationale of why she was going to do it and when she was going to do it and all that kind of stuff. And so we never believed her. And then like 2 years ago, she just actually did it. And so it was a surprise. But I mean, this was the 500th variation of moving that she had planned on. And I always liked that about my mom. Like, you never really knew what was going to happen. So I've always looked at it as kind of a, I guess, fun, positive type thing. I guess probably some psych out there is probably like, stability would have been nice for you, John.
Sure.
But
it's interesting what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not to interrupt you, but I do think it's something about this is a little tough too, because there's the possibility that people that we know will listen to this.
Oh, sure.
And so I find myself trying not to self-censor, but like there's
a
sure,
yeah, a little bit like, I don't want her to think. I assume she's gonna listen to this.
Mom, if you hear this,
she's on YouTube all the time, and she sees me. She's gonna watch this. No, good point. No, it is true. But so anyway, so they were together for a long time before, and then they had never had any intention of having kids. And then my sister, who's older than me by about between 7 and 8 years, she was born, and then they lived in Texas. And so they kind of started, my mom's like, well, because we have a kid now, we have to kind of make roots. So set roots and stuff like that. And frankly, that was not of interest to my dad. So my dad, had more than a wandering eye at that point. And my mom just kind of went along with it. She would say the same. She just kind of went along with it. She knew that was the case. She knew that he was not going to not be great and faithful, but she's just going to kind of work with it. And I think she has we all have self-worth issues, right? And so she just was kind of looking at it as like, I'm thankful to have my family and whatever, this kind of thing. Didn't think she maybe deserved better than that treatment. So then 8 years later, I came along, and again, you can see the gap. They didn't intend to have one kid. They definitely didn't intend to have two. Sure. And my mom will always say that she was on IUDs for both. And so IUDs are less than effective in her mind. And at least in the 80s they were. So then I came around, and my mom said as soon as she learned that I was going to be a boy, she immediately was like, I can't have my dad. I can't have him raising a boy, teaching him how to be a man, morals, that kind of stuff. So they divorced almost immediately after I was born, pretty close to it. And we moved from Texas to Phoenix by the time I was like 7 months old, because all my mom's family was out here at that point. So
she wanted roots, and that's where your family's at.
Yeah, I mean, she just needed a support system, right? She needed she couldn't do it on her own in Texas.
Yeah.
Even though she actually had a pretty successful babysitting business. She did it at home when we were in Texas. That's what she was kind of bringing in her own income. So she knew she could do it on her own. So she started cleaning houses and stuff, and then started building a massage business.
Yeah, your mom's pretty entrepreneurial.
Very entrepreneurial. Yeah.
I was thinking about
very
that.
much so.
Had her massage business for years too, right?
Yeah, that was her.
It's kind of interesting that she started a few other things.
Yeah. She was. She is very entrepreneurial. So, and I think it's just because too, at the time, like, there was no flexible schedule type thing, right? Back in the 90s. Yeah. So you could work
gig work
from
is
home.
not a thing.
Yeah.
Gig work
can't work from home.
Economy. Yeah.
So the only way, if you wanted that kind of flexibility, you had to work for yourself, basically. Right. And so she did, and always did a really good job building her own business, mainly just on referrals and reputation and stuff. So we followed in very similar footsteps there. And similar for my sister too. She also was my sister's an entrepreneur, and her husband's an entrepreneur. So there's definitely a line of us wanting to build that. So anyway, but then for my dad, he actually left Texas and then stayed. He went back to where he grew up. So the Quad Cities area, which is like the border of Illinois and Iowa, and never left. That was his. I mean, I think he actually, no, that's not true. I think he did leave some times, but he always kind of came back.
And contact.
In terms of contact, yeah. At that point, I mean, so that, I guess, yeah. To come back around, that's kind of I guess the geographic, story. But to come back around, then, yeah. So we lived here and we lived in Scottsdale or in Phoenix, in Glendale here, and in the valley. And then he was over elsewhere, always much farther. And so we would talk He would call for a while. It was like every Sunday we would have like a call, and and talk. But to me, it was always so weird because I didn't have that relationship. So it was like,
It's like you're talking to strangers.
yeah, it's very much like I'm just talking to this guy who is my dad, but I don't have that figure there. It's just a voice on the phone.
And all the lore you get is from your mother, essentially, right? Any
Right.
backstory, any context is not necessarily. I'm not saying your mother would skew it, but
No,
it's automatically the context is a little tainted, right?
Yeah, and to my mom's credit, she was always very. I feel like she was always very honest about the circumstances. When I was little, I didn't know about any kind of infidelity or
Sure.
any reason why they broke up too much.
You're a kid, so why?
But I mean, she could have, right? She could have seated him as the enemy and never let me talk to him, right? But she always kept the line open and stuff. And so, and my sister had it a lot harder. She was 7 or 8. She was 7 years old when they left. 8 years old when they left, which is crazy to think like that's my son's age, right?
Yeah.
That's old to lose your father and all that stuff. So she struggled a lot more with the actual like loss of a parent, essentially. And then she struggled on the other side. I think it's me putting words in her mouth.
Sure.
But then it was the other side of like not just not having him there like me, but it was like then him letting her down now. Like now she actually feels like she's deprioritized.
Yeah.
Because he's not making an effort to come see us. He's not there,
Well, there's a feeling of abandonment.
Yeah.
Right? Which is
well, and I think there's definitely, and she'll say, my mom will say, so this is very much passes the censor screen. But there's resentment toward my mom, even of like, you left, you separated us.
Yeah.
And so I count myself somewhat lucky to say that I feel like that I actually got out of it from like relatively pain-free in that sense. Like there wasn't.
None of it's pain-free, but yeah.
Well, I just didn't know. Like you can't. I like my wife will talk to me about that too, and she's like, well, and Pascal, like everybody. I've only had 3 actual girlfriends in my life,
Sure.
but they all had fairly, even if like they weren't together, there was present 2 parents present,
hands-on father,
right?
Sure.
There was 2 parents present in their lives. So, and they were always just kind of like, what was that like? And I'm like, that's so bizarre because it's something I never had. It's like saying, what was it like not having your cousin Jimmy in your life? And you're like, I don't have a cousin Jimmy. And it's like, well, yeah, but so you don't really know what it's like. Well, yes, you do. And what was it like not having him? Yeah. It was like, oh, I guess it's a bizarre non-existence.
Really
yeah. Yeah, it was a bizarre kind of just non-existent type thing.
I mean, for me, I feel like that would raise a lot of questions, right? Because obviously you see other people with father figures,
sure.
people in those lives. And so I think like there's a different kind of pain that comes from that. And again, I don't want to put words in my mouth, but I do want to acknowledge that, maybe it wasn't necessarily the same thing that your sister went through. But, there's a different kind of pain that comes with this unknowing or like this having to figure it out on the fly, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the question, it became more like, well, what am I missing? Like everybody talks about, how could you not have this person? And it's like, I don't know. But apparently there's something I'm missing out on. I mean, my mom and everybody who was here was very supportive. Yeah, what was crazy is like when you think about like not only did I not really have a dad here, but I only had one uncle.
Right.
My Uncle David, Uncle David was great. But there's only one uncle, and then I had 3 aunts and my sister and my grandma. Yeah. And those were the presents. I had like no male influences. I had one male influence, but he was he's an uncle. They didn't have any kids. It was pretty distant. So it was just a very feminine led, lifestyle. Yeah. Now I think, like I said, I think there was a lot of, they did great. Like I still got to play sports, and it's like all the things I guess you think about. Like still got to do all the boy stuff. I guess still got to have very much boy lifestyle and stuff. And that was never really held back. But I mean, I do think that there's like some things of like
there's some things that you learn from observation.
Yeah,
there's a difference of having like a male to look at and kind of model yourself after or against, right? Like depending on the situation, right? I'll say this from my side. Yes, my dad wasn't there every single day, but I still saw him on the weekends. And so I had like an observation to be like, oh, so this is what guys do, right? Or like even at my mom's house, there was my stepdad, right? And like for all of his stuff, because he has a lot of stuff that weren't great, but for all of his stuff, I did pick up some of his ideas and some of
Sure.
like, what he did as well, and some of his mannerisms. Sometimes I'll even find myself copying. So it's interesting to think about, right?
funny,
Like
yeah.
some of that's like modeled after that. So not having that, it's an interesting like
Yeah.
background, right?
Yeah. I kind of, well, and then I think that opens up a lot to, like, I don't know if part of me, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I can't say honestly, like whether or not, like, I definitely, like we were talking about, there's definitely like things that I guess I would have needed to, like, I learned to tie a tie from my uncle, right?
Yeah.
Because he had to teach me. And this predates internet, right? Like my childhood predates internet. So there's definitely like that. But like it's also here, I just don't feel like there's some male things that you don't see that much of. Like, I don't know, you don't see a lot of guys going out hunting.
Yeah.
And you don't see, like, there's
That's like a regional thing here, too.
yeah, it's
like
just
for
not
us,
like you don't do that.
people don't hunt.
What are you?
They do, but like I just don't know them.
I don't know.
I don't know those people.
I don't know. You have to go far for that because it's like, what are you going to hunt? Like javelina? Like it's like it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
So I don't. I don't wonder if I missed out on that kind of stuff. But yeah, hell, I don't know what the hell to do with a car, or anything. Like, there's a lot of things, but I don't know. I also know that there's a lot of guys out there that don't know how to do anything with a car.
So my dad's a plumber, right? My dad's a plumber, and you ask him about cars, he knows like the basics. Like he's like, oh, there's a timing chain in that thing, right? But that's because he's had repairs and he didn't know what to do with them, right? So like I think a lot of guys have those like manly gaps in knowledge,
Sure.
right? Like I have a ton of them, and I think you and I have talked about this too.
Yeah.
Like, even though my dad was a plumber, I didn't necessarily grow up with like tools in the house, right?
Sure.
Because they were all in his work van or other
Sure.
places, and if something happened, he'd take care of it, right? So like traditionally, I always felt like when it comes to like tools and like fixing things, not in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I got older and like had other jobs, it was like, oh, you just need the tools, and then you can figure stuff out on your own. You figure it out, right?
I wonder, the thing that I always wonder about, instead of it being like a functional skills like that, I wonder though if I just missed out, and it's not knocking you or anything, but I think similarly that, like, I know that I lack sometimes some assertiveness.
Sure.
Honestly, like, I'm just going to go do this thing. I'm just going to take charge and go do it. Sometimes I lack that. I'm a little more like reserved, hoping somebody else will step up. But like, hopefully somebody else knows. Right. So I wonder, there's elements now being a dad. I see my son be hesitant about things occasionally, about that kind of stuff. And I try to assure him that I bet he could do it. Let's try it. What's the harm in trying something and failing? Like, let's just try it. I've never done this before. Let's try and do this. Like, let's try. And I think, but that's something out of me seeing him realizing that, well, I can't, he's a very smart kid. He should be able to do something like this. Me realizing, well, I'm not setting much of an example of like somebody who takes charge of like this thing. I just call somebody to fix it or repair it or something like that. And so, and he knows that his grandpa's good at that. Like, he knows, like, grandpa, he actually thought that his grandpa, it was a mechanic, like, flat out. He's like, because he knows how to fix cars. Like, and I mean, our father-in-law knows a ton about cars, but he was never a skilled, like, trained mechanic, but he knows a ton about cars. He's an engineer in many regards, because he just understands how things work. But he had a great male influence in his dad, who also knew how things worked.
And I also think a lot of tools. I asked him about this recently too, because our father-in-law, right? Like, I think for me, especially around that 14, he became a surrogate father, essentially, right? Like, I started working with him. I spent a lot of my time with him. Sure. I think very much so for you.
Yeah,
as well,
very
right?
much. Yeah.
So like, I think I was asking him about this recently. Like, oh, hey, how did you get into this whole like fixing things? Like, what did your dad teach you? And because his dad's very handy as well, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, no, my dad didn't teach me any of this. He just had tools lying around, and so I had a lot of free time. And he would say, oh, he actually didn't want that life for him, right? Sure. He didn't want him to be like a manual labor kind of person. And so he's like, I just kind of played around with tools back there and kind of figured it out. Yeah. So I was like, that's interesting. I didn't think about it like that, right? Yeah. I do think having the example of like, this is what a guy does, that makes sense, right? And
so yeah, you could argue, like, again, functionally, there was no, functional gap. There was not a functional gap there, right? Like, if his dad didn't actually teach him how to use it or do the things, then he just learned on his own. Maybe it could just be also a symptom of our time that we live in, right? Where, they talk about like kids these days, but they talk about how kids don't know how to be bored anymore.
Yeah.
And I think similarly, yeah, it's hard for us to be bored. We always find something to entertain us. That's, there's so many ways to stimulate our brains again, whether it's looking up stuff or whatever. But we're not just sitting around like we used to. I mean, like there's nothing to do. Like in summer, there's nothing to do, and then going into our dad's tool shed or whatever and starting to do stuff.
So that's actually kind of a solid segue. We're going to go back to
go ahead,
stuff, but I think some of this is also interesting. Is that like, I think that because, again, dad was not necessarily there all of the time, right? I'm seeing him on weekends only, or if I'm seeing my stepdad, it's only when he's home. So like, very end of the day kind of situation. I think a lot of what I considered fatherhood or male role models came from TV.
Yeah.
Right. And recently I was watching that 70s show, and I think it's interesting because what you're talking about is like, this level to be bored. Red Foreman, awesome TV dad. Very angry, right? There's like a level of rage there. But I think with him, one of the things that was kind of interesting on like a recent episode I was watching was he gets laid off, right? And what does he do? He finds things around the house because he's bored to like fix, right? And like he doesn't do it greatly, but I think that's interesting. That's kind of like a characterization of a TV dad, or what dad should be, that we're seeing in media that like we kind of lose. Maybe it's a bygone era because it's the 70s, right? But like that's just not something that kind of exists in that same way today, right? I'm not bored and trying to fix things. I'm not
right,
either, but
No, yeah. It is interesting to do that. Also, that speaks to that need of him needing to feel useful.
Yeah.
Right. Useful and a provider, functional. I think we kind of have that, right? Like we're hardwired to be like, I have to be functional, like as a man.
Yeah.
I have to be
something,
producing something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a man skill. I don't know if that's something that we need to necessarily overcome, or like say I don't need to be functional to be a man or something like that. I think that's actually pretty core to us. We just don't understand. We don't realize it sometimes. And I think it's actually something to turn into, maybe, of like, okay, like as men, we need to feel functional. And if we don't feel functional, that's going to lead us to feeling depressed or lost or not, or less valuable, instead of us being like, well, I just need to stop feeling that way. What if we just sought out more opportunities to feel functional?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what if we did try and do something and get really good at something and skilled at something? Wouldn't that then make us, I don't, again, the point of this episode, the point of this show is not to say, I know the answer. It's to say, well, maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong. Or maybe what if I did this way? Because one week I'll say, I need to feel, well, because we talked about like when business is going bad, here's how I feel about that, and here's because I feel like I'm not providing and being functional in a lot of ways. And then there's a lot of things that come out of that, but maybe so there's one thing. Well, maybe I shouldn't worry about if I'm failing here, blah blah blah. But the way to make us feel better about things is to really turn that around. Well, how do we feel functional again? If we can't do it through a job because we lost it or something, then what can we do? Like, what can we make that makes us feel like I'm like silly things, but like I still find accomplishment in doing something creative when I cook about stuff, because I feel like I'm providing something really valuable. Like, oh, I did something really cool here, or maybe I can. Obviously, there's like the honey-do list, like you just said in that 70s show, and fixing things. But what else can we find that's like I can do something to be valuable?
When I messed up my back, right? There's a period where I had a really really bad sciatica to the point where like I couldn't move, I was stuck, and I needed to feel useful. Right?
Yeah.
Because I was unemployed. I mean, it was like 6 months after, it was about a 6-month period right after I graduated from college. And so like I needed to do something. I needed to figure out like how I was going to feel or get like self-esteem, right? I got really into cooking. Binging with Babish actually made like the huge difference with that.
Oh yeah,
right on YouTube. But like I got really into cooking, and so like you're right. I think there is something to that. There's you feel like you're contributing, right? Yeah. You're creating something as an end result.
And honestly, it's nice to just get some small wins. Yeah. Like when things are going bad, and you're just like, all I can see is bad. And you're like, but I made this, I killed it with this thing. I was able to knock this out, right? Like I remember, like there's just times when like things are going in a certain way, and then I'm just like, I'm gonna, we get a steak or something, and I grill a steak, and it's that perfect like medium rare pink, great grilled seasoning, and you're just like, nailed it. First thing, step one. All right, got it. And then you just kind of build from that. It's like, well, I was able to do that, and then you take control. But that's a whole other episode. I actually like it. We should earmark it and say, let's talk about ways of like turning the tide on something.
I was also thinking like we could also go through this at some point and like, you know, edit certain points, parts out, certain points right. that we like, or things that we don't feel necessarily relevant, or however we want to go about it, right? I'll kind of let.
But I like that. I mean, because otherwise you just skid, you just start spinning and you spiraling, and
I also don't want to get rid of like organic conversation.
Oh no,
I think there is something to that, right? Like I think those are when our best conversations happen. Organic, but I think you're right. I think like trying to get back on topic is always hard.
And you know what? And honestly, I think I will always stand by this. If you're listening to this and watching us, and you want to complain about how we don't stay on topic or stay focused, then you know you probably just need to find another show.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm not gonna.
I think that there's also a good portion, hopefully a good portion of you who are just sitting around and saying, I like to just hear these guys talk.
Yeah. I mean, if that's not the case, then maybe we're not doing a good podcast, right?
That's hard to say. Well, actually, I was listening. So I was listening to the It's Always Sunny podcast, and one of the episodes, they were spotlighting one of my favorite episodes. Now they're doing a rewatch show, supposedly. They stopped.
Yes,
but they were.
Right?
They stopped out of nowhere. That's fine. But which is totally true to form of their show. I'm brand with them. But they were spotlighting one of my favorite shows, but they didn't have like somebody like another person there to kind of wrangle the conversation and keep it moving. They usually do, and lacking that person, they almost talked nothing about the show. It was like all this thing, and I was a little bit bummed, but they even joked about it. And then the next episode, they joked about how like, did we not do a good job on that last one? Because then they had like their main producer was out, so they got somebody else to fill in temporarily for this episode, and they're like, did we not do a good job on that one? And they're just like, you know, we're just going to avoid certain topics here. And so I think, but then Mac was like, now wait a second. Did we just do a bad job at covering the episode, or did we make a bad podcast episode? Because you could actually have it be a good podcast episode and do a bad job covering the show. And that's debatable, but I was a little disappointed because it was one of my favorite episodes. I was hoping to hear like some fun stuff about it, but you know, whatever.
But yeah, I don't necessarily know if, I think that's a good point, right? I don't necessarily know how on topic we have to be, or how organized we have to be with these. This is organic. We're still figuring this out. Still deciding, right? So maybe some days we take it a little bit more, this is it. And I do think, on my part, I do need to get a little bit more prepared, right? Because sometimes I'm just going, I'm like, I've got a brief outline of what we're talking about. And then we get into it, and I'm like, that was not anywhere in my outline. I didn't even think about it.
No, I'm with you.
But that's part of like the fun, I think, right?
Yes.
Part of the organicness.
I think we'll get more. Yeah, but we'll have some episodes more prepared than others.
We'll keep trying to get better about staying on topic. And so I think last part we were on was you were talking about your dad,
right?
And then I think,
the kind of the idea of not knowing what I was missing, essentially. Right. I'm still figuring that out sometimes. Like I don't really know what I was missing there, but I will say so. But then the other elements of this, like my sister and my dad had a terrible falling out when she was in high school, like really bad. I think she was just finally done and jilted with him. I think there was maybe a couple more conversations when she was in college, but then it was over. Yeah. And so then that's like 20 some odd years of no conversation. So anyway, and me too, but again, but we never had a falling out. It was very much a fizzle, but again, it was mainly because it was just like, I don't know what I need to do or how much I care about contributing to this, because it was just like, if I've never had you here, it's almost like more of an effort because I'm not doing it for me. It's almost like I'm doing it for him because I don't understand, right? Like I don't understand what I'm losing here. So I think it was an interesting thing. So he and I didn't talk for a pretty long time. Also because I'm not a big phone talker, and he talks forever on the phone. And I'm just like, I'm not going to answer this because I don't have 2 hours to give to just like rambling. And also like, it's also weird because he'll try and impart occasionally like some fatherhood type things. Like maybe he thinks he needs to offer. wisdom. And again, I'm just like, who are you? Like, what are your credentials here?
Like, listen, I've never felt that thing.
And I'm like, I barely listen to the father figures I have. You, who's biologically that. It was a weird relationship. It was also really weird because, so then what happened a couple of years ago, which was very odd. Actually, not even a couple of years ago. It was probably about last year, maybe around this time.
Yeah.
I get a call out of nowhere from a random number, and then I get a text following up and says that you're well, actually, before I get into that, I will say we did start talking again when I found out that I was going to be a dad. I thought that I should let him know that we had a grandpa, because my sister has no kids, so this would be his first grandchild. So that was about 8 years ago, and I remember I think I was watching it was it was like a culmination. It was one of those things where it's, like all of a sudden you're like, everything is telling you to do something.
Yeah.
And so we were watching those episodes of How I Met Your Mother, when it was like really focusing on the dad, on Marshall's dad, and it was right.
Those were gut-wrenching episodes.
Spoiler alerts, right? If you haven't seen it,
It's
but
like
at this point, it's a 20-year-old show. If you haven't watched it, then you need to really get with it. But if you're like, I was just gonna watch those episodes right now, it's like, come on, buddy.
Ooh, we got some news for you.
Forget it. All right, so for like a season, they really focus on the relationship between Marshall, one of the main characters, Marshall, and his dad, and how much of a relationship that was. And of course they're focusing on it because they kill him off out of nowhere. Do you know that they actually, in that episode, when he finds out that his dad died, that the actor actually didn't know that was what was going to happen? Oh. So like in the episode, if you watch it, it's called it's called Good News or Bad News. I can't remember which one it is, what the episode is, but he had just like he was freaked out that he was not going to be able to make a child, like he had bad sperm, whatever, right? And so he was like, he was worried about that and everything, and I think that was the episode. Anyway, so there's all this stuff about like that there's leading up to bad news or something. And so he gets a call and from the doctor who says, actually, no, you very well could, just give it time. You're very well. And he says, honestly, I thought it was going to be bad news, like, and stuff. And so he's very relieved. He's outside the bar that they always hang out in. And his wife, Lily, pulls up in the taxi. And his reaction, he says, like, Lily, did you hear the news? And I think that's all they fed him was those lines. Tell her, be excited. Tell her, like, oh my God, did you hear the news? I can't believe it. And she's crying, like she sobbed, like her. And she tells him that his father died. And so he full on has to react out of surprise. He didn't know this was going to happen in his character story arc. And so, so now you got to rewatch it. Powerful moment.
Though, because I mean that's essentially how it happens. If we're being honest, right? Like
nobody saw it coming. Yeah, I mean you kind of know because they allude to, like, the phone just keeps ringing when they're talking, because he's trying to call his dad at that exact moment.
Apparently there are like I didn't know this, but apparently in like previously in that season there's like countdowns. There's like little numbers.
That specific episode counts all the way down to that exact moment. So yeah, there's numbers all the way through. Which is like an odd, cool little thing. But
sad, kind of
very sad that was a countdown.
But it's interesting. Yeah,
that one episode was a countdown. So
anyway, watching that. Yeah,
I was watching. So we were watching that. I said, and I swear we were probably watching something else too. That was like, oh my God! So all it's doing is talking about how important. And then also like that opened up. I think it was around that time when it opened up how Barney in those episodes was really struggling with the fact that he didn't have a dad in his life. So it's like they really went dad heavy on that show, which is great. Because I think it shows the importance of fatherhood, right? Yeah. Like it's. And I think they did a good job in that show too of the fact that, I mean, Barney was kind of was essentially a sociopath. So maybe this is not a good example of what you need of it, but talked about how, like, and I think for both of us, maybe, or at least for me, I always struggle with how like, I always struggle with the idea of expressing how important it is to have a dad in your life, because I feel like I don't want to disparage
Your mom.
moms. Yeah, especially my mom, who was a great mom. But you know, she I don't want it to be like, well, if I would have had a dad, you know, that would have made my life better, so much better. Because I don't want to, like, it's not meaning to do that, but it is meaning to say, like, there's a dynamic of this. Also, you know, there's so many different things to caveat to this, but I think that always made me kind of like not want to bring it up, or like bite my tongue on the idea, right? Like, it would have been nice. Yeah, it would have been nice. It would have been nice to have this, right? Something. So I think there's a struggle, a little bit of a censorship struggle there. But I will say, but I think that show does it really well, in a sense of, like, I think there's even an episode where, you know, all Barney's talking about or thinking about is his dad and the longing to have a dad. But then he realizes that his mom did so much stuff for him as his dad, you know, like,
Such a sweet moment,
yeah. And so he realized he had a good mom. So anyway, so we did reconnect for a while, and it was, but in a way, I was able to, like I said, he talks a lot, so I'm not a big phone talker, but yeah, I called him out of nowhere and was just like, hey, you know, and talked to him, hey, Dad, you know, and he was very surprised, very excited. We had a great call that time. Told him that, you know, we're gonna have a baby and that kind of stuff, and so yeah, all this good stuff. And so we carried on conversations like that through, you know, for a while, and then thank God, texting had come around since, because then we would text, and I could text him pictures, because he always wanted pictures of me and then the kids and stuff like that. So I could text pictures, and like, so that it made it so much easier to bridge some of those gaps that we had before.
Also, when you have a topic that you're like, you have common ground
Right.
to talk about now, I think it's easier. Now it's a more organic relationship rather than this phone call that you're making. Where it's like, what are we doing this for?
Yeah, and honestly, like, I was like, Sunday night call on the landline phone, and I just have to be somewhat hostage for an hour.
And you're a kid, right?
And I'm
so
a kid.
Like, I want to go run around.
And it was Sunday, and I was like a weird kid who like treasured Sunday.
Sure.
Because it was like, I need to be fully decompressed before going back to school.
I'm still that way.
So I want to do anything. My mom talks about, like, she's like, we were not allowed to do anything on Sundays. Like, we could not go to movies, we could not do that, because it would eat up the day. And I was just like, no, I refuse.
You're like, I need time.
I need every minute of this day, which is pretty funny. My son has some of those tendencies now, but so I get it. But anyway, so we carried that on, but then I kind of drifted a little bit, because again, I was just like, now, like, then being a dad, I was like, there's so much going on, I just can't take time out. But around this time last year, I get a call, and it was apparently a friend of my dad's calling me to let me know that he was like in a bad state, like he was in his apartment, and I'm loosely conscious, like, they had to break in, they had to like bust in the window, all this kind of stuff, and he's in a bad state. And so they get him to the hospital, and he was kind of suffering from some sort of mysterious ailment. He had really severe diabetes. He had all this kind of stuff. So, you know, but it was clear that he was not doing well. And then it seemed like he was gaining ground, doing better. And then it was like turned for the worse, like really not doing well.
I remember you got like the initial call, like, while we were at a recital, right?
Yeah, we were at my daughter's like dance thing, and so anyway, and I was just like, okay, well, but it was bizarre. Like, I'm getting the call. I'm in Phoenix, like, and she's like, and then his friend was like, I don't really know anybody else. So he knows, I don't know, like, I know you're far. I don't know. Like, I was like, well, I mean, like, just keep me informed. Like, so that's all I could do, right? But I'm next of kin, I guess, technically.
And also, how do you process that, right? Because this is a relationship where it's like, yes, he's your dad, but you're not necessarily.
I don't have
that kind of relationship.
Right. So I kind of just took it on, like, I mean, I'll do what I can. Like, and so the hospital called me, and like, it's like, all right, well, I don't know what else to do here. Like, thanks for letting me know. Go ahead and do this stuff, I guess. Like, I didn't really know what what role I was supposed to play.
There's no script for that. Yeah, I get it.
But I just did what I was there for, I guess. And said yes thing. But then I remember, like, he's got a brother that lives, I think, nearby. Like, I didn't even know where he lived, frankly. Like, geographically, the Quad Cities were a mystery to me. I didn't realize that Davenport, which is where my dad was, and Rock Island were probably 20 minutes away.
Yeah, so that's really close. Like,
Yeah.
incredibly close.
Yeah.
That's literally down the street.
It's
That's like
down
your
the
house to
street.
my
You're
house
so
kind of
quick.
situation. Yeah.
So quick. So anyway, but I didn't know how to get in touch with him. I had never talked to my uncle, who I, again, wrapped my head around, who technically my uncle. Never talked to him in my life.
Yeah.
But I was Facebook friends with like his kids.
Yeah, cousins, right? Yeah.
Which again, I had never talked to them before. I knew of them through stories from my dad, right? But that's it. So Facebook message, blah, blah, blah. I got in touch and then I got in touch with, so I Facebook messaged him like, hey, my dad, your uncle, he's in a bad state. I was wondering if I can get in touch with your dad because I think that he still lives in the area. If he's still there, maybe he can help out. I don't know if they're on speaking terms or what, but I figure they weren't on speaking terms to some degree because they called me, right?
Yeah,
like
if you were closer,
his friends,
he probably would have been next to kin.
His
right?
friends would have been like, we should call his brother who lives across. His friends didn't even know he had a brother that lived nearby. Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, clearly he's created this like wall around himself. So anyway, so then I call like I felt for first time talked to him for a while. I was like, hey, so it's funny to talk to you. I guess you're my uncle. I've never talked to you in my life. Yeah. Again, this is last year. This is not like, I'm a kid. This is last year. I don't know. It was bizarre. So then he said that he was going to go see him, and then they ended up. So anyway, lots of stuff. And then months passed, and then I thought it was kind of just odd, bizarre. But now my uncle's really taking on the ownership of being, was taking on the ownership of being the point of contact for everything, be a power of attorney, blah, blah, blah. And then a few months later, my uncle calls me and he's like, hey, I just got to say, he's not doing well. You should probably think about coming. Like, physically, he's not getting any better and he's probably can only get worse. It seems like, honestly, nobody knew still what was going on. So, but he did definitely look like he was in bad shape. So I debated it for a while and I was like, I probably should just go because I hate the idea of having something where I'm like, I wish I would have gone. Or,
you don't regret.
There's a long time. Yeah, it's a forever regret, right? So I was like, and frankly, like there's a direct flight you can take from Mesa to Moline, Illinois, which is again in the Quad Cities. One of the Quad Cities is Moline. Direct flight from Mesa, Arizona to there. So and it's on Frontier, so it's dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So like I'm running out of excuse not to. It's going to cost me $200 round trip.
Yeah, no, agreed. And not to disparage him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not necessarily something that you were doing for him. I think it was something that you were doing for you.
Right.
Which I think is more important. Right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of power in that where it's like I'm doing this for my closure. Right.
Yeah. It's like honestly, it's like the idea of dying and having like nobody except for like people. It seems so sad to me. So I'm like, if it's helpful for him to have even like a little bit of like, hey, I'm here, like you mattered, right? Like, okay, here we go.
That's fair.
So yeah, I went. Can't say it was a great time, but it was fun to see like my uncle for the first time.
He showed me around.
So I got to see a bunch of places. I mean, there was elements of it that I made the most of it, but yeah. So then I saw him a few days in a row. Spent quite a bit of time there. He knew I was there. He's was lucid enough for that. And there's things I got out of that. I don't know if it was all good, but it was good for me. It was what it needed to be because I needed to kind of, I thought it was good to see him. He had a different perspective on how the relationship went with my mom. He had some guilt that he was associated with, but not in the guilt that I thought he was going to own up to. So I don't know. It was interesting. I could learn things from it in a different way than I thought I was going to. And then so I had an interesting experience out of it, and then ultimately he passed in November, and so yeah, he's passed away now. And again, I don't really think that I was like, well, one, we'd expected it for about a year, and then two, again, it was like an odd relationship, an odd level of connection with somebody.
Do you know what he officially passed of?
Not really. I think frankly it had to be like diabetes, complications from diabetes. He didn't really take care of himself well at all. And frankly, honestly, I don't even think the nursing staff, not to get anybody in trouble, but I don't even think anybody was really, frankly, trying to take care of him. Now, actually, they were checking on him well, but nobody, like, maybe it's a Midwest thing, and now I've just totally ruined the whole Midwest. We've lost the whole audience. No, sorry about this. But I don't know about how much of a focus people have on actual health where he was. Sure. Maybe I won't say the whole Midwest. Let's just say this specific spot or who the people he was around didn't seem to have a great focus on that. For example, he had very severe diabetes, and he was constantly being fed donuts and things like that. Oh. And I'm just like, and nobody's going to stop this thing? Like, yeah. Do we think we need to stop this? And then another case in point of why I think that was actually something to do with it is when they took him, like he became unconscious. He's just say they removed the feeding tube. He was on a feeding tube. So they removed his feeding tube to let him pass, basically. And they thought it was going to take, I don't know what it was, like 24 hours, something like that. I don't remember, something very short. And he ended up living much longer than that off the feeding tube. And honestly, I think it was like, my wife's big into fasting. We talked about last time. I think frankly, it was like there was a dietary cleansing that was actually happening, that he actually was improving for a bit of time. And then, of course, then your body gives out if it's, being deprived that for so long. Because there's food and water. Like, they cut out everything at that point. Otherwise, you will live for a while off the feeding tube. So it's food and water, dehydrate to death, basically. So I think, I don't know, it was spent essentially that. But yeah, so that, I guess that's like the actual brass tacks, like story of my relationship with my dad. But yeah, I do not have answers to anything, because honestly, I don't know what we had no relationship really, other than that, he was my dad, and then he was there. He was never really actually there, but he was he was a phone call away. Yeah. Is a bizarre thing, no, right? I didn't have any guidance coming from there. Right?
It's weird because, same thing for obviously not to the same extent. I think yours is very different, but I think it's different because it's not like my dad wasn't there for a portion of my life, right? Like, he's obviously a person, he exists, right? But not necessarily in the way that you would think from what of traditional dads, right? Where you have a two-parent household and you have someone that you're seeing day in, day out, and they're talking to you on a daily basis. You don't have that kind of relationship, and so it's almost harder to talk about because you don't even know how to explain it to anybody, right? Yeah. You're like, well, yes, I have a dad, but he's not there, but he is there, but he's not. You know what I mean? I get that. That's a complicated scenario.
Wait, why don't we split? We're gonna end. Well, let's end this episode.
Well, we can also continue. Maybe we listen back a little bit to some of this, and then we continue based on
or whatever.
Yeah, because
because we can bracket this. Yeah, we can bracket this to say this focuses on our fathers, and then the next one we can get into is our views of fatherhood. Because what I was going to transition into was going to be carrying it forward, becoming a father or preparing to become a father someday, and our views of that, how we kind of view, and then our perspective on fathers and media. So maybe we can slice that up.
Sure. What I like about this though is that I think, for me, what I always worry about is that there's not enough conversation, or that you're forcing a conversation, right? Because that I feel like you can tell when that's happening. Yeah. I don't think that's the case here, which is great. Right. I think there's a lot of density to pack and unpack, and I think if it takes a few episodes, then it takes a few episodes. Maybe we do a series on fatherhood, and that's how we run this, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what this becomes or how this looks, right? Because we're still kind of trying to figure that out. But I think we just roll with it. It's kind of the best way, right? That's kind of what we're doing anyways.
Let's do it. All right. Well, let's stage that for next time here. Deal.